Oh boy, huge scandal. Oregon accused of tampering. Yawn.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks, even though I'm kind of annoyed. I am your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, win or lose. Yeah, just like that. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Oregon beat Ohio State, where it really counts. Obviously. That's coming up later on today's show, and a portal target. But first, oh boy, I got to throw out my Friday lead segment rundown and run with this one because this stuff drives me insane. So, Boise State offensive coordinator, outgoing offensive coordinator, he's going to fall back into an analyst role there in Boise. Dirk Koetter accused Oregon on a weekly radio show of tampering, quote unquote. What does tampering actually mean? You tell me. Because, oh my gosh, it's such a blanket catch-all term for anything that is shady or against the rules or outside the norm or whatnot. But there are a couple reasons that this is completely and utterly ridiculous. The first reason is that tampering is so widespread, nobody should care. I guarantee you Oregon players have been tampered with before. I can almost guarantee it, based on what Dirk Koetter is saying here, Oregon has, by the rule, tampered with other players. But the intent of a tampering violation per the NCAA is one in which a player is contacted as a current member of a team before he's actually entered the transfer portal, and then that team is still playing its season. That's the stuff the NCAA wants to get rid of. They've done a masterful job of that per our usual arrangement, by the way. They have been phenomenal at keeping this stuff down. Yeah, heavy sarcasm there in case you were missing it because they have not. This stuff is ridiculously rampant. This goes down to the FCS ranks. Players are tampered with all the time. Think about this. When a player goes into the transfer portal and enters with a do not contact tag, do you think the first time he will be in touch with another school is once he's officially signed all of the paperwork and put his name officially in the portal? Is that what you really think? Tampering, quote unquote, can be as simple as a text message. Yeah, that's what it can be. A kid hasn't officially entered the portal. If he is contacted by a coach of another school by the letter of the law, that's tampering. I got to tell you, I just don't care. I don't care. It is so rampantly widespread. It is the modern day paying players to go to school. You know it's happening. Everybody's doing it. Who's actually that harmed by it at the end of the day? Sure, you can talk your way into a circle and figure out that this guy or this group of people or it's bad for this reason, they're being harmed, whatever. It's not a big deal. It really isn't. This was made a big deal. On3, I think, first broke it with another doozy of a story about Oregon. The last one that came from that establishment was the insightful revelation that Dan Lanning is going to go be the head coach of the Chicago Bears. Now, that's not actually what they said, of course. What they said was, the question was asked to someone in the NFL, well, which college coach would catch your eye? Well, Dan Lanning, and that got turned into Dan Lanning to the Bears, question mark. Yeah, it's all just completely and utterly ridiculous. So that's the first reason that this is so completely and utterly absurd, and it's just, I don't know what Oregon did to Dirk Koetter other than beat his team by 3 points this year, and I don't know, man, because the number of coaches that could come out and accuse another school very publicly and very clearly of tampering with players is literally too many to count. It is way too many to count. Portal additions and transfers don't happen by accident. Points of contact get met. Let's say, by the way, when you hear the word tampering get thrown around out there, let's say a kid is going to enter the transfer portal, but he hasn't yet officially submitted his paperwork and had it processed to where his name appears in the portal. but he's intending to. Let's say he's submitted his paperwork even. It just hasn't processed yet. If that processing hasn't taken place, but he is telling the coaching staff he's going to leave, and that kid were to get a message from another coaching staff, that would qualify as tampering. That is how dumb this word is. It is so incredibly rampant and widespread and technical. Like, it's completely ridiculous. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is this doesn't even appear to be the most nefarious example of what gets referred to as tampering. Because the worst example you could think of that I can understand why you'd want to not have present in the sport is kids being again, this is happening anyway, but I get why this is not great. Kids are still in season for a team they are playing for while being contacted by other teams. Now, does this happen at the professional ranks? I'm not as tapped into behind the scenes roster making of the NFL. I can tell you in college sports, it happens a whole heck of a lot. It's just something you got to deal with. It's not going anywhere. You can't enforce every single instance. But the bad version is, hey, this kid should be able to focus on finishing the season strong with this team and being ready for their next game, not thinking about the offseason there. Now that speaks to how screwed up the college football calendar is that you allow for roster moves to take place while the season is going on. It makes no sense. Absolutely, positively no sense. But we do it anyway because we pretend like the academic calendar is actually a hindrance when in fact Carson Beck's in the portal right now. Why? He's a grad transfer. Well, what about the classes have already started? Yeah, who cares? I mean, legitimately, who cares? It is such a nothing obstacle for fixing the college football playoff or the college football calendar, including the playoff, by the way. But the nefarious example isn't even what Koetter is alleging here. What he said is, yeah, after the Fiesta Bowl, oh, you mean when Boise State's season was over? Some kid was contacted by Oregon and offered $700,000, a defensive starter, to go play for the Ducks. Well, yeah. You mean Oregon waited until your season was over before they contacted a kid, but Oregon's getting painted in this wildly negative light. I mean, the Ducks are just becoming low-hanging fruit in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. Because they haven't won a national championship yet, because Phil Knight exists, because Nike is a real company, because Oregon has a bunch of uniforms. It's just such an easy string of data points to put together for people. And stuff just drives me insane. I had other stuff I wanted to talk about, like, what are Oregon's transfer priorities? Do they still have portal priorities? But instead, I get saddled with this nonsense, and I have to go on that. I'm all worked up now. I'm recording the show late at night. I don't know how I'm going to be able to get to sleep. I've got too much juice pumping through the veins because this stuff is so annoying and mind-numbingly dumb, but I talk about it because it needs to be called out as such. You should not see this and think, oh, Oregon's doing something really wrong. No, they're doing what everybody else is doing. This is so common, it would make your head spin. It happens in college football. It happens in college basketball. I'm sure it happens in every other college sport to some degree as well. But I know for a fact that this is so ridiculously common. It is the equivalent of, wait, Duke gave Zion Williamson money to go to school there? Yeah, of course they did. They're trying to win. That's what they're doing. So, all right, rant is over now. We're getting back to football. Oregon's next transfer portal target is not at a position you were thinking about, or I was necessarily thinking about, but now we are. And right now, you should be thinking about TurboTax because they are the sponsor of this particular episode. Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, that's a thing of the past now because taxes, they don't need to be complicated or stressful. They often are, but TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers, no more wondering if you're missing out on deductions, whether you've got one form or 20. TurboTax is there for you. They're experts, give your taxes their undivided attention, which is what they need, and you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get peace of mind knowing your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate. That's what TurboTax is there to do, so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only on the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So Oregon might not be done in the transfer portal. According to Justin Hopkins of Scoop Duck, Oregon is among the favorites to land Emmanuel Pregnon, transfer from USC, on the interior of the offensive line. Now, they also had a transfer out, who we'll talk about, Mikael Gardner, because I had a couple of thoughts there. But Pregnon is not a name I expected to have pop up on Oregon's radar here. The interior of the offensive line is losing a couple of guys, but it kind of looked like there were other options available. So when I first thought, wait, going after Pregnon, they've got their two tackles in Harkey and World. They'll probably be backed up by guys like maybe George Silva, if he decides to come back, or Janoris Wilson, who was the jumbo tackle this year. That would make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But on the interior, boy, it kind of seemed like there were a lot of options there. Matthew Bedford has, from what I've been told, getting a medical red shirt and coming back for a seventh season of college football. Maybe this means that isn't going to work out and Bedford's career is done. That would kind of stink because he was supposed to be eligible this year, but he got hurt and he hardly played, and I don't believe he hit the minimum threshold of playing in 5 games to burn a red shirt in that situation. So he should be back. But yeah, you lose Marcus Harper and you lose Nishad Strother, and those are guys who were among Oregon's best guards this year. But Kavika Rogers played, Davey Uli played. They have other interior offensive linemen waiting in the wings, but if you're getting Bedford, who you didn't really have from last year, kind of thought, it might be okay, but Oregon could feel differently. So Pregnon is a guy that started at Wyoming in the past and was at USC this past year. Would not be someone who I think they would bring in to be a depth piece along the offensive line, but we've also thought that before. Junior Angilau came over from Texas, and there was an injury factor that came into play here as well, but he never found his footing at Oregon. He never saw the field in a meaningful way, but he was an experienced player from his time at Texas, and kind of looked like once he got healthy, he just eventually got beat out because Nishad Strother was someone who got hurt, but eventually worked his way up the depth chart, and Strother, I think, was Oregon's best guard this year. I thought Strother was really good. You know, Oregon ran, I think, most successfully behind the left side of that offensive line because you had Connerly, who was just a road paver and might be a first-round pick in the NFL. And then you had Strother, who just made a habit out of taking a defensive lineman and not necessarily moving him down the field, but he just kind of turned him. He just turned him around, and that would create a lane. Oregon did that a lot this year. So I thought Strother was good, but adding another veteran to the offensive line up front, I could see working out. I could see why they would go in that direction, but this is a guy who figures to go somewhere and start. And if he were to transfer to Oregon, maybe Davey Uli is your 6th offensive lineman again. And if that were the case, hey, that's not the worst thing in the world. Because Uli, I thought, was quite good when he played for Oregon this season. And if he's, starting caliber, but not asked to start for a full season, he's also dealt with injuries in his career. That could make a lot of sense. But that's what I came back to after my initial reaction. Wait, really? They are? Like, oh, okay. But then I thought about it, and look at the way that position played out. Going into this season, in August, I talked about the offensive line and predicted it left to right to be Connerly, Harper, Poncho, Bedford, Cornelius. That combination never materialized. And you had points in the season where both guards went down. So this would be Lanning, I think, kind of covering, and Alik Terry as well, the offensive line coach, who's a stud, covering their bases as having a backup plan that includes a veteran somewhere, somehow. If your top 3 guards were Pregnon and Bedford and Uli, all 3 of those guys have veteran playing experience. some more than others. But if one guy goes down, or maybe they like the rotation of guards that they had at the end of last season, you can know that whoever you're putting in is going to have seen the field in a significant and meaningful way over the course of multiple years in college football. So that's how I think it could make sense. Now, on the flip side, Oregon had another transfer portal departure, and that's Mikael Gardner. So I was under the impression that Oregon wasn't going to have any more transfers out because we're more than 5 days past the season, but maybe the paperwork just took a while to file. I don't know. I didn't mean to rhyme those words together. I apologize if it sounded corny because I heard it too. But Mikael Gardner was one of the defensive linemen that Oregon recruited in the class of 2023. They had 10 defensive linemen in total in that class, several of whom, but not all of whom, are currently impact players. Amari Washington is going to be a starter next year. Tuioti and Mateo have been impact guys for the last couple of seasons, and Blake Purchase is probably going to be a more impactful player next year than he was this season when he redshirted, which is not a traditional path towards, playing out your career where you play a lot as a true freshman, you redshirt the next year and don't play a whole heck of a lot, and then go back into the rotation. But hey, all right, cool. So those guys have been the most impactful of the group so far, and Gardner joins Johnny Bowens as the guys to transfer out from that particular class. But I like Oregon along the defensive line, and Gardner is someone who I certainly saw the upside, and like everybody else who, played or who was a blue chip prospect along the defensive line, your film coming out of high school tends to look pretty darn impressive. And Gardner was someone who I could have seen playing on the interior, but I think with the addition of Bear Alexander, that kind of crystallized for him, this is not the place where I'm going to see the field the most anyway. And we'll see where, he ends up. And I am curious all the time when guys transfer away because they aren't going to play at Oregon, where they end up going. I mean, for those who don't know, by the way, in a crazy turn of events, but not unsurprising after the Gasparilla Bowl, Ty Thompson is staying at Tulane and he's going to play tight end. Now, what I was told is that he could have gone to the FCS level, perhaps play quarterback, but wanted to stay at the FBS ranks. He's going to switch to play tight end. He's just not a quarterback. And let that be a lesson in how to view recruits. They are potential. And just because a kid doesn't get developed doesn't mean your coaching staff isn't any good. Or just because he doesn't hit that full potential doesn't mean your coaching staff isn't any good. But just because you recruit someone and he's highly rated, that does not mean... Now, Gardner wasn't the highest rated of the bunch. He was actually one of the lower rated defensive linemen in the group. But just because a kid has that ability doesn't mean it's automatically going to translate. So I think Gardner looked ahead and saw Bear Alexander coming in, Aiden Breland, who got into the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. Terrence Green, I think, has seen more snaps than he has in garbage time situations, which is how we got an indicator a season ago that Amari Washington would be a player on this year's defensive line. I think there are just more names than he was comfortable trying to battle out. And this is a great way to go about it if you're Oregon. Bring in the most talent that you possibly can. Let the cream rise to the top. Who cares what the rankings are? Tuioti wasn't the highest rated guy, but I think we can all agree he deserves to be on the field as often as he is. So maybe a transfer on one side, a transfer out on the other. I like where Oregon is at trenches-wise next year. Nothing's crystallized. Nothing is final. There's still a lot of moves that can be made. But right now, I think Oregon is in a good spot on both the offensive and defensive lines. And by the way, being good in the trenches, it's good. Good thing to do. Thumbs up. 10 out of 10. 5 stars. All right, so Oregon beat Ohio State. Not on October 12th. On January 9th. I love Jackson Shelstad. He's awesome. He's awesome. I need to tell you how awesome he is. First, a reminder, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. They just are, and they start this weekend. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. So whether you want to bet the remaining college football playoff games or the NFL playoffs or anything else that FanDuel's got, go poke around. It's just fun to see what kind of information they've got. They've got a bunch of great stuff. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started. $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Remember, you don't even have to be right. You just have to place a $5 bet and boom, $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So Jackson Shelstad is awesome. This Oregon team is also pretty awesome. So they beat Ohio State 73-71 in Columbus. Solution, just play the game on a non-neutral site. Oregon, in the last 15 years or so against Ohio State in men's basketball and football, I can't remember last time they played Ohio State or if they had before in basketball, but play it in Columbus, Oregon wins. In Eugene, Oregon wins. Rose Bowl, 0-2. National championship game, lost. So clearly there just needs to be a home and away factor. That's the lesson here, obviously. So the other lesson is that Jackson Shelstad is becoming what we always knew he was going to be, but it's happening right here, right now, and Oregon badly needs it. So he had 24 points to lead the way for the Ducks. He was 8 of 11 from the floor. This is a guy who has struggled shooting to begin this season, was, I believe, at 22% from beyond the arc coming into the last couple of games. He is 9 for his last 11 shooting threes. 5 for 5 against Maryland, 4 of 6 against Ohio State. He hit big free throws down the stretch, put the pressure on the officials who made a call. I'm sure Ohio State fans were annoyed watching that. I get it. The call can go either way. The guy is not in legal guarding position. Offensive player got benefit of the doubt. He goes down. This was after Oregon almost blew it, by the way, which I'll get to in a sec. But hits a couple of clutch free throws. He was 4-4 at the line. Biddle had 21. Nobody else had a double-digit scoring effort. Barthélemy had 7. Barthélemy's coming back down to earth, which is perfect because Shelstad is heating up, and eventually Barthélemy will find his stroke again. But I have, throughout this season, described Keyshawn Barthélemy routinely as Oregon's most important offensive player. He has been. Because he was scoring well at a time where Shelstad couldn't shoot the ball, was just missing open three. Well, that dude looks dialed as can be right now. He's not going to go 9 for 11 from 3 for the rest of the season, but Shelstad is not a big guy. He's incredibly quick. He can create his own shot. He can get to the foul line. He logged 36 minutes in this game, and he and Biddle were phenomenal. Biddle, by the way, 4 of 8 from beyond the arc. This is something I've touched on a couple times with this team, but the importance of Nate Biddle and KJ Evans, who was 0 of 3 from distance this year, but needs to keep shooting, because the importance of those bigs being able to shoot threes unlocks the full potential of this Oregon basketball team at the offensive end. Defensively, I thought they did a good job, came out with much better energy, and Ohio State did have 39 points in the second half, which is a little high, but a lot of that came at the free throw line. And as is always the case in college basketball, there were plenty of questionable calls, but Oregon had 22 free throw attempts, so it wasn't like it was some massive disparity there. I did think they missed a couple against Ohio State, fouling Oregon, particularly on Nate Biddle. But Biddle's a big guy, so you don't get benefit of the doubt there. So Biddle hitting threes. He had a huge 3. Oregon trailed by 6, late shot clock possession, and Biddle just popped free and nailed a triple to get it to within 3. Then Oregon trailed most of this game. And then they just found a way. And that's kind of the story of this team right now. They just find a way. And that mantra that Dana Altman iterates all the time, sometimes you, sometimes me, always us. I mean, it's more an Oregon basketball Twitter thing than Dana Altman per se, but it applies to his team. That has been the story of Oregon this season. Sometimes it's Shelstad, sometimes it's Bartholomew. Sometimes it's Angel, sometimes it's Biddle. Sometimes it's Bam, sometimes it's Bamba. Sometimes it's neither one. And Oregon, I don't want to see them go down the path they did last season where they were just relying on two guys. It was the Couisnard and Dante show. That's what this game was. Not pretty, found a way at the end. You look up, two guys had 45 of Oregon's 73 points. Nobody had more than 7 points. I'm sorry, TJ Bamba had 9. I missed that in the box score here. But Bamba got into foul trouble in this game, or else I think he would have done well. Came out aggressive early, which I really, really like. Oregon needs a guy who has a little bit of height because Shelstad is small and Biddle is not, creating his own shot per se. Like, he gets shots from other guys, particularly Jackson Shelstad. Oregon needs Bam Tracy or TJ Bamba to be a consistent one-on-one get a bucket player, and it needs to be TJ Bamba. Tracy can do it in spurts, but not consistently. It needs to be Bamba. That's why I was excited about them bringing him in. But he got into foul trouble in this game, and so Shelstad just kind of had to take over. And Oregon struggled inside early in this game. They kept at it enough to where they found some success down low. But the best moment of the game was Oregon is down by 2, and they've got the ball. They've been it had been this back and forth of Ohio State has a 10-point lead, Ohio State has a 4-point lead. Ohio State has an 8-point lead, Ohio State has a 4-point lead. Ohio State leads by 5, Ohio State leads by 9. It was just Oregon couldn't make the run, but then they made the run. They put up 46 points in the second half, which is incredibly impressive, particularly on the road. I'll touch on that more in just a sec. But Shelstad, then in the biggest moment of the game, snatches a kid's ankles. I mean, you need to go watch this highlight if you didn't already, because holy smokes, he just dropped a kid. He created so much separation. It was like a shooting drill. Buries the 3, gives Oregon the lead. Then Oregon has a 3-point lead with 30 seconds to go. One stop essentially from a win. They play good defense. They don't foul. Unfortunate bounce on a ball that just shaved the front of the iron. Came right to an Ohio State player, and he puts it up in a 1-point game. Then Shelstad gets trapped in the corner. Dana Altman called a timeout, and I don't know what inbounds play was drawn up. It didn't work very well. Shelstad gets trapped in the corner, tries to throw it off the Buckeyes, fails, and Ohio State suddenly has the ball. Down by 1, 20, 15 seconds, however long was left, and then Oregon fouls. Guy goes to the line, hits 2 free throws. And I'm going, no. Not after the Rose Bowl. Like, please just give us something. Throw us a bone here. And then Shelstad comes down the court, attacks the basket, doesn't settle for a long 3. Even though he was 4-6 from beyond the arc, he attacks the basket, draws a foul, hits 2 clutch free throws. Then Oregon gets a stop. Shout out Bam Tracy. Contested a shot solidly that was way off the mark. Biddle the board. Makes a free throw. Ohio State, desperation. Heave doesn't go. Game over. Felt like Oregon stole this one. I don't think they can play that same brand of basketball and beat a solid Penn State team on the road this weekend. But this is Oregon's 6th Quad 1 victory. It's early January, guys. This is tied, or I think the graphic on the broadcast said that this is the best start record-wise in the history of the Dana Altman era. Better than the start they had before an Elite Eight Final Four run in back-to-back seasons. They're 14-2, 3-2 in conference play. One of those losses is a desperation heave by UCLA at the buzzer, but just finding a way to win these games is solidifying Oregon's resume right now, which is in a really good spot. You can't lose every other game, obviously, but Oregon is playing well enough to win. They're finding ways to win games. The only team in the country with more Quad 1 victories than Oregon is Auburn, who everyone will tell you is one of the 2 or 3 best teams in college basketball and looks like they're destined to be a 1 seed in a national championship contender. So Oregon's resume is phenomenal right now. Phenomenal. And the Big Ten is really good. Saw that with Illinois last week. The Big Ten is really good. It's going to be hard. Oregon goes at Penn State. That game is on Sunday. And Then come back home to play number 20 Purdue, a program that was in the national championship game last year. And Washington is up next week as well. So glad Oregon got the win. Feels good to at least throw some kind of jab against Ohio State, even though it's not the one we were hoping for. But that man Jackson Shelstad, I was waiting for the offensive awakening. It has arrived. He is awoken. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.